I guess this won't be a 5-star read after all. Welcome back to my channel. So I'm sorry I'm running around all emo looking today, but I really wanted to match my lipstick to my mood, and it's suffice it to say, it's not a very bright one at the moment. I'm actually a little bit nervous going into this video because I genuinely feel like, just looking at the other reviews that people have left of this book, that we have read entirely separate stories. In my brain, it does not compute how really anyone would enjoy this book, let alone love it so much that they would call it like their new favorite book they've ever read. It completely boggles my mind. Not to say that other people are not entitled to their opinion, la-di-da, but like, I just cannot at all imagine it. And I'm assuming in doing this video I'm not going to be making myself very popular with those people, but then again, who cares? I need this outlet. I need to let you know what a shitty book this is, and we need to get into it. So let's do it. If you follow me on social media, you will have probably already been expecting this video, and as promised, I am going to be doing my rant review for The Poppy War today. I need some tea, just... As you guys probably know, this is a 2018 fantasy debut novel that has received, as far as I could tell, nothing but praise from all ends. It's set in an Asian-inspired fantasy world, but it's actually pretty closely modeled after real events in Southeast Asia. The country the story takes place in is called Nicara, and that's pretty much the equivalent to China. And this country is at war with what amounts to Japan, and this book is called Mugen. And then you also have a little island nation that was pretty much extinguished at the end of the Second Poppy War, which again has its equivalency in the Opium Wars. It's pretty much the same thing, and that is called Spear, and it is pretty much Korea, even though Korea isn't an actual island, but in this world it is. So the island of Spear had a lot of really strong fighters and a lot of shamans among those fighters that could commune with the gods and pretty much conjure fire from nothing. The nation of Spear was pretty much taken into the fold of Nicara, and they used pretty much those strong fighters in their own army in the fight against Mugen. However, it got out of hand, and Mugen pretty much razed the island and killed every single Spearly, is what they're called, alive. So now they're pretty much an extinct race. Almost. So that's kind of like the world that this is set in, and then we follow a orphan girl called Rin, and she has been taken in by merchants. They are actually opium traders, and they treat her pretty badly. And she grows up in their house having to help them in the shop and things like that, but she also has a kindly tutor that teaches her in like all kinds of topics, specifically training her to pass the Keiju, which is like a statewide examination. And if you pass that exam, you get to go to a really prestigious school, so rates of passing are expectedly pretty low. But for Rin, even just passing is not enough, because she wants to be at the top of her class so that she can get into Sinigard, which is the most prestigious military academy in the country. So as you might expect, she studies really, really hard and manages to get into Sinigard. So the book is split into two parts, and the first part kind of just follows Rin as she wants to get into the academy, passes, and then like the life at the academy. And then the second part follows a newly broken out war with Mugen, in which Rin is taking part. Another thing that needs to be said is that this book has a magic system, and it revolves, as I said, around shamanism and communing with the gods. The thing is though that shamans actually need to ingest drugs, specifically opium or heroin, to access the pantheon, is what it's called, the place where the gods reside pretty much. And then there's different gods, and depending on which god you have like a connection with, those kinds of powers you can kind of make your own. However, it's pretty dangerous because the gods are very strong beings, obviously, and it's really hard to control them. So it's not really you controlling the gods' power to do as you wish. It's more like the gods taking over you and like just using you as a vessel to influence the world in some way or another. Most people don't believe that shamans even exist, and that the whole thing with the spirits being able to call fire from nothing was pretty much just a myth, or like an exaggeration of some kind. So that is the plot of the book, and going into it I had very high expectations, first of all because it just really sounded interesting, and also because of the actual myriad of positive reviews that I've heard about this book. And actually at first my expectations were more than met. I really love the first part of this book. I read it in maybe 2 days or even less. I literally couldn't put it down. I was trying to carve out more time of my day so I could devote it to reading this. I loved it, even though the premise is a little bit cliche, or like a lot cliche, because you have this like poor peasant girl with no background and or unknown background, and she has these random natural talents and she's really smart even though she's never had proper training or lessons, and by miracle pretty much she passes this exam, gets into this academy where she's being bullied for being a peasant and meets with a lot of adversity from students and teachers alike. And then there's like one exception of like she makes like one student friend and also a teacher that's really eccentric and takes her under her wing and helps her, and like it's pretty much the plot to so many books I've read. But still, I really enjoyed it in this one. I thought it was well done, it was well written. I really cared about Rin as a character, specifically because her motivation so strongly like shown through all of her actions. From the very beginning she is determined to get into this academy because otherwise she would have been forced to marry a like much older guy and like give him children. That would have been all that her life amounted to, and she was very opposed to that idea. So anytime that she was close to failing on this path to getting into the academy or getting to stay at the academy, she would remind herself of that, and it would push her to even more extreme actions in the pursuit of just what she wanted. And I really admired that, you know. I thought it showed that she was a very strong person, a very strong character, very determined. She had a lot of potential and she was making the most of it, and I really enjoyed reading about that. However, based on that first part, I was expecting the book to go down a road of political strife. It kept being mentioned in the book that another war with Mugen was pretty much looming on the horizon and coming fairly soon, and that there was a lot of infighting between the different warlords in the empire, and that it was really difficult to kind of get them all on the same page. So I was expecting, because this is going to be a series, right? So I was expecting the first book to really focus on the national conflicts and on the politics maybe behind this Keijo exam, because one of her classmates once makes a snide remark saying that the only reason she got into the academy was because they had like some sort of quota to fill, which sounded really interesting and like a plot point. I feel like they could have been explored so much further. I would have loved if there was some sort of like intricate politics going on, of like we need to look good in front of certain people, so we need to get some peasants in the mix, even though, let's be honest, there were 0 peasants aside from Rin, so I don't even know, but still it would have been so interesting. I feel like I wanted to know more about this like political side of it all, and then maybe there would be a process of trying to get the warlords to reunite at the same time as Rin was like learning things and kind of figuring herself out and finding out that she had like special powers or whatever, and kind of coming to terms with that. So that was my expectation of it, and I feel like based on the first part that would have worked out wonderfully. It would have made the pacing worked so much better than it ended up doing, because what actually happened in the book is that while the author focused on Rin's first year at the academy in quite a bit of detail, she then jumped over like the next several years and just kind of said like, and then she learned this in the next 2 years, and that was kind of it. And then all of a sudden, out of what seemed thin air, they're in full-blown war with Mugen, and I was just left so confused. The pacing was so erratic. I felt like there was no time devoted to the things that actually mattered and that should have been kind of the lead up to this war. It was very much like, oh, there's some like fighting happening, some skirmishes, and then all of a sudden someone declared war, so now there's war. And then on the next page it's like, oh, now they're marching on Sinigard, and next page, oh, now Sinigard is destroyed. The capital, mind you, of the empire, and the seat of the most prestigious military academy in the land, and it's just gone now. So there's that, I guess. I honestly felt so confused by how quickly the scene changed from the setting of this academy to the setting of in the middle of an all-out war. From that point forward, the book took a nosedive for me. I started to get really angry at it because it had promised me so many wonderful things in the first part that just were not delivered on. At the same time that this drastic change of setting occurs, because Rin is then taken from Syndergaard and placed in a division of the militia, we also get a complete change of characters. So pretty much, with very few exceptions, all of the characters that we got to know in part 1 are just gone. I don't mean that they died, but they're just gone, because there's a change of setting and there's a change of like everything pretty much, and they're just like not in the picture anymore. And it felt like such a waste. Like, why have you been trying to build up these characters and then just like, they're just gone now. We don't care what happens to them now, they're just gone. I felt the same way about her tutor even earlier than that, but it was such a minor thing. But literally she has this guy help her for free, pretty much, get her to pass the Keijo exam, and then once she's at the academy she doesn't even write to him once, and he's just also not in the story anymore. I feel like all of these side characters are literally just means to an end for the author and for the main character in a sense, because as soon as they leave the scene they're just not in the general picture anymore, and it's so frustrating. It would have been much more interesting to develop these different characters individually to the backdrops of these different settings instead of just like switching out all of them, particularly because then when Rin meets these like new people in her new division, those do not get the time of day at all. I get that as an author, you maybe don't want to start the process of developing your characters in the middle of your novel. Like, I'm assuming you'd have better things to do, right? But seriously, that's why you don't change your entire cast of characters in the middle of a story. It does not work. It literally felt like these new characters were just a list of names that had like powers or whatever, and that was their only defining characteristic, and beyond that they were just there to be there, but there was no actual point to it. I could not tell you what any of them were like because they weren't like anything, pretty much. So the only constant in all of this is Rin, and even she kind of changes a lot in transition from part 1 to part 2. As I said earlier, Rin has a very strong personality in the beginning, and she has a very strong motivation that she keeps reminding herself of anytime she you know, gets close to maybe losing sight of her goals. However, this war pretty much ruins all of that. It not only ruins her motivations, but it ruins her character, because from that point forward she doesn't really have any goals anymore, I feel like. She spends most of the time of the war panicking about it being a war. And I'm just here like, girl, you decided to go to a military academy. What did you think was going to happen? Like, seriously. But still, I get trying to make your characters more human, to show that they're like maybe not okay with the idea of war after all, like in theory maybe, but not in practice. Like, that's sure, that could be a complex character arc for your character to go through. But that's not what happened. She was just flip-flopping on her personality traits constantly. She would go from being panicked about the war to being super ruthless all of a sudden and making really questionable choices, to going back to being like, but wait, maybe what I did was wrong, but like, I don't know. She would also be incredibly insubordinate to her commander, but at the same time she was falling in love with him, which is just the weirdest part of all, and then go back to calling him names and just being a general asshole. But just in general, I found her personality at that point so difficult to pin down, pretty much because she had none, right? She was only reacting to things, it seemed to me. She never did anything like proactively, so that makes it really difficult for her personality to shine. I just, at that point, didn't care about her anymore because I didn't recognize her anymore. Not least because she was literally the star pupil in the strategy class that she took at the academy, but as soon as she entered the real world, it seemed like she lost any and all sense of tactics, strategy, intelligence. As I said, she didn't really do anything. She didn't really contribute anything to the war effort. even though the tactics that she came up with in a class setting were actually pretty original. So I'm just confused all around pretty much at that point. Like, you set up this character to be really smart and strong and determined and have like set goals, and then just because they're all of a sudden in a war, you take all of that away from her and you leave behind this actual husk of a character that has no redeemable qualities left. I won't go into too many spoilers, but the ending just made me so mad. Basically, Rin becomes a very unlikable character step by step over the course of the book, and it all kind of culminates at the end where she does something really terrible. And this is hard for me to say because I have honestly been wanting a morally questionable female fantasy character heroine for a very long time. For example, I forgot her name, but the girl from the Bones and Shadow and Bone. The girl from the Shadow and Bone trilogy, I wanted her to make bad decisions, follow the Darkling, kind of go over to the dark side, that kind of thing. I was rooting for her to do that and she didn't, and I was disappointed by that. So based on that alone, you'd think I would want her to make such terrible decisions and kind of go down that road of like wanting power and stuff like that and putting her own desires over those of others. Because let's be honest, at this point, we have enough self-sacrificial heroines that are willing to give anything and like lay down their life to save a random stranger. So theoretically, I was on board with her going down that path, but in reality, the choices she made, again, were not consistent with what she had said that she wanted. Her choices and her motivations at that point, such as her desire for vengeance, seemed to me to come out of complete thin air at that point. If you compare this situation of the ending of the book, where she does something purportedly to avenge her country and her friends and whatnot, and you contrast that with the Rin that we knew in the first part, where her entire motivation was to get powerful, be strong, not have to like make sacrifices anymore, and kind of just like get to make her own decisions. I almost feel like the Rin of the first part was more ruthless and more selfish and also smarter. And the decisions that she ended up making at the end of the book did not only clash with where she had developed towards, but I felt like this random desire for vengeance just came out of completely thin air. She basically just carbon copied that off of her commander, and she became, this is another thing, she became so easily influenced. She was this super strong character, so determined, so self-assured, and then she just like, oh wait, you think this? This is how you feel? Okay, now I'm gonna feel the same way just because. And then I'm gonna do really extreme things because of this murky emotion that I've just taken from you. So Rin as a character ended up being a pretty bad disappointment, and as with many books, the character here was supposed to kind of carry the story, so that's already fallen through. So the only other thing that could possibly redeem it now would be the plot. So the plot of the second part of the book, I can't even describe because it feels like there's really nothing there. Basically, they're at war. They're defending the city, not the synagogue, but another city that they think is a crucial point. So the Mugen soldiers need to get past there to get further inland. So this is where they're like standing, making their stand, being like, no, you can't come through. But then that entire section of the book there, it was just so boring and super inconsistent with itself. Supposedly, the city was under siege, but then also somehow enemy soldiers would constantly come into the city limits. Like there's one instance where they find corpses of enemy soldiers randomly in a part of the city, and I'm like, wait, I thought this was supposed to be a siege, so what are you doing inside the city? And also there's scenes where it's like where like Rin is supposed to be on lookout on a tower and stuff like that, and she's like, well, I don't see anybody. Like if it's a siege, they're supposed to be like at your gates, right? They're like there, you should be able to see them. So I don't know. So by reading a little bit more, I think what was supposed to be happening there is that the enemies had kind of already breached the city in parts and like taken over certain sections of the city, and they were still holding other sections, so they were kind of fighting against each other within the city. But to me, that's not a siege. Like, I don't know, maybe there's a different concept of what a siege could possibly mean, but that's my idea of a siege. It's like a city and some walls, and they're there and they can't come out, but also the enemies are like literally surrounding them. So that's what I consider a siege. So I don't know what you would call the actual thing that happened in the book, but to me that's not a siege. But that whole confusion kind of shows how little actual explanation of the events was there at that point in the book. I feel like the author again thought that maybe the world building was only necessary in the first part, and then you just skip to a war and everything is just like whatever, we don't need to go into detail on all of that. I just felt really disconnected from anything that was happening. And then there's one incident right at that point in the book that I just got really angry at. And I put this on my Goodreads, in my Goodreads review in the spoiler section, so I don't think it's like a big spoiler, but like it's something that happens, so if you don't want to know any like concrete things that happen, then you can just skip ahead or whatever. Enemy soldiers come to like parley with them. They come waving a white flag and they invite them kind of into the city, or maybe not, or maybe they meet outside, I don't actually know. But they bring with them salt and sugar as a peace offering, and they're saying like, let's discuss terms of surrender, whatever, and this is what we brought you. Understandably, the commanders of our side are a little suspicious, so they have their enemies eat a little bit of the sugar so that they can tell if it's poison or not. They do so. Then one commander tries a little bit of it himself and he's like, yeah, it's fine, okay. And then they move their enemy leaders to a different place and just kind of say, I think, like start distributing the salt and the sugar to the people. And then one child kind of comes running in and he's like, well, it wasn't salt, it was saltpeter. And then like everything explodes. The city explodes, there's lots of people dying, half like buildings are falling down and people dying, as I said. And then they kill the enemy commanders and then that's it. That's the entire incident. So my issues with that are manifold. First of all, you have your commanders, some of which were actual teachers at the academy, that are supposedly intelligent people. And they're intelligent enough to test the sugar, but somehow they didn't test the salt because they were like, well, if one of them is fine, then the other surely must be too. Because that's logical. But what's even worse than that is that it seems to me that the author has no idea how saltpeter works and that it needs an actual chemical reaction to happen for it to explode. Yes, saltpeter is a component of gunpowder, but it doesn't mean it is gunpowder. And if it were gunpowder, you couldn't possibly confuse that with salt. So what is happening here? What happened in the time that they took the salt, or actually saltpeter, off screen to make it explode? This is never explained at all. They don't even think about it. They keep calling it the bombs and they talk about it later, but there were no bombs. It was the thing of saltpeter. Like, what happened with it? What happens to cause it to explode? Can someone explain this to me? Because it couldn't have been the enemy commanders because they were all with them the entire time, so they couldn't have added anything to it. And then did they start distributing it already? Did people take it with them? Like, they would have probably noticed. I don't know how it tastes, like, I have no idea. Maybe they would have noticed it's not salt, but like, eating it, I don't think causes you to explode. So what happened? What the hell happened for this to occur? Honestly, I'm not the biggest like chemistry buff at all. I know very little about chemistry, but I just Googled it. It was a simple matter of just Googling it to find out this is not possible. This is not something that can happen. It doesn't just explode. Like, what happened? I mean, it's one thing to be inconsistent within your own story, but then to be so lazy as to not even fact check the tiniest things, it's beyond me, really. I get maybe this seems like a minor thing to most of you, but to me, this was the moment. I mean, I was already pretty sure about that it wouldn't be getting better before that, but this was the moment where I was like, I guess this won't be a 5-star read after all. But mainly the plot in the second part of the book doesn't have a clear aim, and that is its biggest problem in my opinion. They kind of make in-the-moment decisions. There's no overarching strategy or tactics involved for anything. They seem to constantly be waiting for reinforcements, but then even when they come, they don't have a clear idea what to do now. So it's literally just biding their time until they die sort of mentality thing, and it's just super frustrating. Like, who cares to read about that? What kind of story is it that you just like waiting there for things to happen? And here's the thing, I know that this book is inspired by the massacre of Nanking by Japanese soldiers, where they brutally killed and raped a lot of civilians in Nanking and like murdered the entire town. So it seems to me that the author had such a strong urge to include that element of story, to have a fictionalized version of that happen in the story, that so much of it is literally just biding our time until our side is kind of weak enough so that could happen, right? Like that's the impression I got. It wasn't a story for story's sake. It was a story so that that could happen. And that's never a good setup for the story to actually be good. But basically the only thing that is set into motion by that is a slew of terrible decisions that lead them to create the next enemy that will be the main villain probably in the second book. And honestly, that is just so lazy. The book is much too self-contained. Pretty much they deal with the Mugen threat in this book entirely. And again, this just ruins so much of the book's own build-up, because they've been hyping up the Mugen threat for the entire book. They even had a war happen, and then pretty much the threat is extinguished within like seconds, right? Without, again, going into too much detail. Most great books that I have loved in the past have done a great job at interweaving certain storylines and interweaving the threats and not having them occur in like chronological order in a sense, but kind of have them be more simultaneous and more realistic kind of thing. And this feels like really like, okay, first step we deal with this, and then just at that time something else appears, and then we're gonna deal with that, and then something else will appear. Like, it's so dull. Who cares? I don't care anymore, I can tell you that. What does that all boil down to? Well, it boils down to that this was one of the most disappointing books I have ever read, if not the most disappointing book I've ever read, because it literally had so much potential and it made me care so much about what was happening, and then just took it all away from me. It has characters I don't care about anymore. It has a plot that had a direction but then lost it and is now just meandering around aimlessly. It had a magic system that could have been interesting in theory but was never fully explained, and is so murky on its rules that it's just really difficult to follow. It had a setting that had so much potential and was so interesting and actually a little bit historically accurate, and could have just asked and answered so many interesting questions, but really only boiled down to there being a good side and an evil side. And ultimately the setting didn't really matter all that much. It literally could have been based in any kind of made-up fantasy world. There was no reason to set this in an Asian-inspired world at all. I feel like it completely let down its setting, it completely let down the real-life events that inspired it, and most importantly, it let me down, because I had such high hopes. I was promised great things that weren't delivered on. I was given great things that were taken away from me again, and as I've already said in my Goodreads review, I do not just dislike this book. I am so bitter. I am so bitter, and I'm holding a grudge against it now. I have no problem, or less of a problem, with a book that's just straight up bad, but this wasn't straight up bad, and it's so much worse because of it. I feel personally attacked by the existence of this book, and I will not stop ranting about it for the rest of my existence. So there's that. And I think you've already gotten a pretty good taste of that in this extremely long video, but I still hope you guys enjoyed it. Even if you're someone who thinks I'm like a negative person and likes to hate on books just a little bit too much, I want to reiterate that that's not my intention. I don't want to hate books. I don't want to be disappointed by books. But when they do this, and they're just not true to their own premise and their own setup and the world that it's set in, and if the author just gets distracted by wanting to prove a point and wanting to just include a certain scene that then kind of completely takes attention away from the rest, like that makes me angry and it makes me sad, because I'm just here thinking of what this book could have been, and it could have been a 5-star book and it could have been a new favorite, but it wasn't. And that's just the truth of it. That's it, where I'm gonna end this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel for more videos every Tuesday and Friday. And let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this book, if you've read it, or if you don't agree at all, because clearly most people do. So there we go. I will see you very soon. In the meantime, check out some other videos I did, and I will see you then. Have a lovely week. Bye!